Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In just 1 minute, we'll get started, just waiting for folk to come in. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's town hall. We're so appreciative to have you all joined us today, and that we're also joined by our Chancellor Castro. Dr. Joseph I. Castro is the recently appointed 8th Chancellor of the California State System, the first person of color and native Californian to serve in the role. Prior to becoming Chancellor, Dr. Castro served as President of Fresno State for nearly 8 years. And prior to working at Fresno State, Chancellor Castro also served in the University of California for 23 years, serving at the UC San Francisco, Berkeley, Davis, Merced, and Santa Barbara campuses. Chancellor Castro is nationally recognized as a proponent of innovative student success measures, a champion of educational equity in all of its dimensions, and a leader in supporting student basic needs success. I would also like to underscore Chancellor Castro's commitment to the students in the governing process. He's a recipient of CSSA's President of the Year award, and after that, he was appointed as Chancellor. And right after that, he met with CSSA as the first stakeholder. Since then, he has been actively engaging with students and has attended multiple of our plenaries. As a point of personal privilege, I have greatly appreciated the transparency that Chancellor Castro has provided me. Welcome, Chancellor Castro. And we'll go ahead and get started with the questions. So just to let you all know about the format, we'll start with the questions that we received via the RSVP, and then time permitting, we'll open up the chat to take more questions.
Nice to see you, Zara.
Likewise. All right, we'll get started with our first question. We've had actually a number of questions related to the pandemic and the campus repopulation. So we had a student from Cal Poly SLO who would like to know how the campuses and or the system will deal with the tenured professors who do not want to wear a face mask.
Thank you. Well, it's nice to be with you tonight and to hear questions from our students. Well, as you might know, we have announced plans for a vaccine requirement for the fall, and I'm excited about implementing that in the coming weeks. And I just received an email. It looks like Pfizer is going to get federal approval here shortly, so that's really good news for us. The dynamics are changing, and I don't yet know what it's going to be like in the fall, if we're going to need to wear masks even in classrooms. We will see. But what I can say is that we're going to take whatever steps are necessary to ensure the safety of our students, faculty, and staff. And right now, the first step is I would like to encourage everybody to get vaccinated, and I appreciate CSSA's leadership in that area. And then we'll see how masking goes. But for right now, we plan to have masking policies. And I think that we'll be able to inspire cooperation. And when that doesn't happen, we'll deal with it appropriately.
Thank you for that. And I'm really happy to announce just recently our board also supported in favor of the vaccine requirement, given just the importance of the health and safety of our students.
Yes.
So our next question, again, similar to the announcement that with the COVID-19 being a mandatory requirement pending the FDA approval, of course, how can students go about getting an exemption from their campus?
Well, there'll be more details coming about this. We're still working out the policy details as we speak. And I anticipate that there will be exemptions for medical and religious purposes. And there'll be more information coming from the campuses about what that means. And students are encouraged to take a look at that. And if they believe that it's important to be exempt for those reasons, then they could pursue it that way. My hope is that the lion's share of our students will be able to be vaccinated, and that will mean that we'll have, at least on the campuses, something close to herd immunity, which I think will greatly lower the stress level for everybody. And I know how excited most of the students are to be back on campus this fall, and I want to make that a safe reality for everybody.
We're appreciative of that. I'm sure our students are eager to return to a new normal. I think actually, now that we're talking about a return on campus, this question works out very well. A student from San Francisco asks, how will we ensure that the transition back to in-person in classes in the fall will run smoothly?
Well, I promise you it's going to be run as smoothly as possible. We're going to be working diligently. We already have been every day, and we'll continue to do that. And I can't promise that it'll be a 100% smooth, but I can promise you our intention is to make it that way, and to do our best to support the success of our students. And it's my hope that our faculty and staff will want to lean into supporting all of you in the most effective way possible, and that we'll all do so with compassion and flexibility and reasonableness. And I think the fall is going to be a transitional period, and I suspect the spring is going to be, even smoother, because we will have gone through the experience of reentry in the fall, so to speak.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm sure, patience is going to be required as we really move back into that. But I think a key point really is communication, and just ensuring that, just as you've been communicating with us, is just always giving us, this advance notice so that everyone's prepared. So I just wanted to really highlight and appreciate, the effectiveness in communication and the early call decisions.
Well, thank you, Zara. And I don't know if it's clear to the other students. I know you're aware of this, but I want all students to know that there is a Chancellor's Senior Leadership Council, and that includes all the vice chancellors here in Long Beach, as well as the presidents of each of the 23 campuses. And we meet on a regular basis to talk about issues like the fall and how we're going to do it together. So I want the students to know that we work together as a team. Your president is a key member of that team, and they're really kind of authorized and empowered to lead the communications on their campuses. And I will do my best to support them and provide guidance. And that's the part of the role of the chancellor, is to provide that guidance to the presidents.
And I think, actually, thank you for sharing that. That was really important for our students to be aware of, the several meeting spaces where there's, a team environment to really talk about our system. We're really big, so it's important that, we have a space where everyone is a stakeholder.
Absolutely. The largest in the country. And and it's complicated, but we do our very best. Again, I want the students to know their presidents are very eager to do the right thing and support them for this fall and beyond.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift topics a little bit and really talk about, we have a question on campus safety. So we have a student from San Francisco that asks, how are you going to help students feel safe on campus, especially our Black, Indigenous, and students of color?
That's such an important question. And I know, Zara, you and I have had a chance to talk about this. We've been through a lot together during this pandemic, and the George Floyd incident and so many others like it have occurred even in just this short time. So I do understand how some students would feel a little concerned, or even more than a little concerned, about being back, and maybe concerned in general about the police. And what I want every student, faculty, and staff member to know, that your safety inside and outside the classroom is vitally important to me and to the whole system. and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we're there to support you and help you to thrive. And if you ever have concerns, I encourage you to let your president know, let your dean of students know. We want to hear from you, and we will do our best to make sure that we're addressing your concerns. And for those groups of students you mentioned, I particularly want them to know that I understand why some of them might be concerned, and I'm listening and learning from those perspectives to see how we can address those needs the best we can. But my goal as chancellor is to make sure we create an environment on each of the 23 campuses and here in the chancellor's office where everybody can thrive.
And I think it's really critical to sort of share who it is you need to speak to about these issues, because oftentimes students sometimes get lost. I know in my first year, I was like, who do I talk to? Like, who do I bring my concerns to? So thank you for sharing that guidance on who sort of is the contact person to at least begin that conversation with on individual campuses.
You bet, Zara. Does that make sense to you? Dean of students is usually a good place to start. I know sometimes if a student feels like they know their department chair, their dean, that's also a place to start. But I think the dean of students is generally the place that I'd recommend.
Thank you for that. It's really helpful. And sort of, I think, a follow-up and a further conversation regarding campus safety. So another student from San Francisco asks, what's your stance on free college for all, debt cancellation, and defunding the police?
Well, I definitely hope that President Biden cancels some more of the debt he has already. There's so many of us, including myself, who are still paying student loans. And, it is true that if you come from a family that is lower income and you end up having to borrow, it does add up, and it does also in some ways slow your progress down after. And Mary, my wife, and I understand that, coming from pretty modest background. So I'm very sensitive to the debt issue. I've seen it with so many students, and I would like to see some movement there. As it relates to free college, my view is that we should, number one, double the Pell Grant. So for the lowest income students, let's get more aid to all of the low income students. Let's modernize the Cal Grant system, and we agree on that we need to get more support through the state. Let's raise more private support from scholarships, grants, fellowships for graduates, all those things. And let's keep our tuition as low as possible. I don't quite see a path for free college at the university level at this point. And I do worry that making it free for those students that come from families that have a lot of means, that may not be the wisest, course of action. So I'd much rather focus on students like myself who've come from those backgrounds and need that extra support, and try to do that at the federal, state, and through philanthropy. And then in terms of the police, I've been listening carefully to the conversations around this, and as you and I have talked about, I again want to make sure our campuses are as safe as possible. I'm very open to ideas where we can strengthen the connections between our campus community and our police department, so that it really is in a place where we feel like they serve our educational needs and our safety needs. And so I'm interested in working on that. And I understand that some of the articulation of you is around, let's put more money in mental health. And I support that, and have been advocating, as you know, Zara, for more investment of public resources in this area in Sacramento. And we will get some more resources in the fall. So I'd like to do that, invest more in mental health, and I'd like to strengthen the connection between our police departments and everyone that they serve on our campuses.
Thank you for that. And I'm sure this is going to be a continuous and ongoing conversation about university police departments and policing overall. I know with myself and the future leadership at CSSA. So we're excited to continue engage in this dialogue and how we can support our students.
Yes.
And I appreciate the commitment to mental health because there's always more that we can do for our students. And now that we've finally been able to somewhat tackle that stigma, it's really important that we continue to invest in that area so our students can graduate and get a degree without these barriers.
Absolutely. Mental health and food security, housing security, technology, and there may be questions around those things too, but I think those are so important in terms of making sure that all students can succeed in the CSU.
Thank you. So at this time, we're opening the chat. So if students have questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. So as they do that, I still have a couple more questions we have from our RSVP. So we have a question on the budget. And a student from Monterey Bay asks, do you anticipate the hiring freeze to be lifted, especially in light of the many campuses committed to making an overwhelming on-campus return in the fall?
Yes, in January, just after I became chancellor, I announced that there'd be no tuition increase for the upcoming year. There'd be no furloughs, and there would be no layoffs, assuming the budget situation improved in the way that the governor and the legislature had committed. And so far, they're maintaining that commitment to us. And I plan to maintain the commitment of no layoffs due to budget. So I think that as far as I can tell, will hold with the budget being finalized in June sometime. So we're getting close to knowing the details, and I feel very optimistic about that situation continuing.
I'm just really excited to finally wait and see that budget pass.
Me too.
You've been very kind to the CSU, so
I agree. Thanks for the advocacy too, Zara. You and the entire CSSA, your voices and all the voices of the students have made a huge difference. I mean, they're hearing from the students, the faculty, the staff, and the chancellor on behalf of all of us. So I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, I just want to note that, you know, that entire CSU community and the different stakeholders, all of us coming together, you know, I really left an impact, and it showed that this year. And so, you know, I know that we will continue to do this under your leadership and under the different leaderships of the different stakeholders. So I'm glad to see that we're off at a right start with our budget pending it passing.
Me too. Now I'm going to miss working with you, Zara. And I know your successor is named Isaac, and that's my middle name, and that was the name of my great grandfather. So I'm looking forward to working with him as well.
I'm really excited to be able to introduce to you our incoming executive team at our upcoming leadership meeting. So it will be a great opportunity for you to connect with the incoming execs. And they're just as excited to work with you as I was when you were first announced. So I really am excited for the future of the CSU.
Well, thank you. We've had a number of important meetings in the short time we've worked together. I think about the Sacramento ones as well as the DC ones with Speaker Pelosi and Senator Padilla. You know, we had Secretary Cardona recently. So we've been making some good progress together.
I agree. I'm really excited about that. So I'm going to shift a little bit now. We've recently been talking a lot, actually, just among student leaders, conversations about sustainability. And we have a student from Monterey Bay that asks, what are you doing to advance sustainability efforts system-wide?
Thank you. Well, as president of Fresno State, I supported very strongly the system initiative on that campus. And it was very important to me, for example, to make sure that our 1,000-acre farm did not get touched. And that was one part of our sustainability strategy. And I'll tell you, it is the largest piece of land in Fresno, and a lot of people had ideas about developing it. So from that perspective, you know, I come to the chancellor's office and want to do everything I can to make sure that our entire system continues its environmental sustainability efforts, whether it's through the curriculum and preparing a new generation of leaders in this area, research in that area. In Fresno, we did a lot of very important water research that was helping farmers to grow more crops, more food with less water, for example, and to be more cognizant of environmental issues than they might have been before. I think there's opportunities with our buildings, with our waste, our energy use. And so I'm going to do whatever I can to support efforts so that our footprint is lighter, much lighter in the coming years.
I'm really glad to hear that we only have one Earth and we need to take care of her. So I'm glad to see that as a system, we take lead in wanting to make sure that we are not, harming our Earth and ensuring that we're being as sustainable as we can.
Absolutely.
So actually, we're going to now move on to some of the live Q&A questions that we have. So the first one is a student from SLO wants to know, what is the status on the CSU including caste as a protected status in the CSU's anti-discrimination policy? I did want to note that CSSA did pass a resolution in support of this.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I read the resolution, and I've certainly been following the issue. And I want folks to know that we take it very seriously. And to the extent that there are any issues related to caste right now, I want to encourage students or faculty and staff to bring those to the attention of appropriate person on their campus. And for students, I'd say the dean of students. So I will be looking at this issue with my colleagues, and I do appreciate the spirit in which it was presented, and I understand the concern. So I want to just express thanks in that way, and we'll be looking at it in the coming weeks and months.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to our second question.
Sure.
So earlier you mentioned technology, and we received a question on what can the CSU do and continue to do to increase access to adequate technology and broadband for our students.
I think there's a lot more that we can do. I'm excited about the opportunities that we have. We've learned a lot through the pandemic, and again, coming from Fresno, we did everything we could to get technology in the hands of our students that needed it, mobile hotspots and iPads. And I know other campuses have done similar kinds of things during the pandemic. This is one of the areas where our new federal money gives us a chance to think, I think, more boldly. And I'm interested in launching a system-wide initiative that has the goal of ensuring that every one of our 500,000 CSU students has good access to technology, including broadband. And we've started to work on an initiative, and I know that they're consulting USARA and the CSSA here. And I talked to the presidents about it. They're excited about doing something in this area. I learned a lot through my experience in Fresno, where we partnered with Apple, and we were able to, and other tech companies too, but we had about 18,000 of our students using mobile technology, and just about everybody that wanted one got one. That was our goal. And some already had their own. So I realized that some students have their own technology and they're good to go, but there are a lot of students that don't, as you know, and I want to make sure that we have a robust program to support them at each of the 23 campuses.
Yeah, that it's really important because, at this point, technology has become a basic need for students.
Yes.
So it's so critical that we look into invest in that sort of access for our students.
I think so too. And to the extent that our students are parents, or they're caring for a parent, they live in a rural area, or they just simply cannot or don't want to go to campus on a daily basis, technology offers them the ability to continue their programming online if they want. And I think that's going to be an important part of the future of the CSU.
Thank you for that. So we're going to jump into a different topic now. We've received questions on the vaccine requirement.
Yes.
So the first question that I can read is, what considerations were taken when making the decision to require a COVID-19 vaccine for CSU campus community?
Well, I'd say the most important consideration, as I was talking with President Drake from UC, is that we both wanted to try to ensure the safety of everybody, and especially the students. We wanted to create the conditions in which, as you come back to campus, you can have that confidence that people have been vaccinated. And if they're not going to be vaccinated, then there would be some kind of a testing regimen for those that might have to be exempt, for example. And I think it's really important in order to ensure the safety of all involved. We certainly looked at the legal considerations, and that was why we've tied it to the full use of FDA approval. And it looks like that is going to happen. We'd anticipated that that'd be happening, and it looks like that will be happening shortly, as well as the need for some exemptions for medical and religious purposes. And if a student decides they do not wish to be vaccinated and are not exempt, then they could take their courses virtually. So there still is the option to do that if they're just a little hesitant. But I just have to say again, I do think, based on the science, that it's really in the best interest of everybody to be vaccinated. And I respect those who have those important exemptions. I absolutely do. I also see the part of it where it's not just us as individuals, but our community, and we can together, by having our vaccination, we can protect others that we love and respect and want to spend time with. So those are some of the considerations that we've looked at, and there are other details that we're still working out, and that policy is forthcoming.
I mean, you mentioned this, talking about not just the individual, the pandemic, just the word on its own, it's a global thing. It's not just us. And we see what's happening in other countries like India, and we have to have a responsibility ourselves to ensure that, we provide health and safety to the individuals around us and not ourselves. So it's so important that when we talk about responsibility overall, that it's not isolated. There's an entire humanity that depends on each and every one of us' decision to move forward.
You're exactly right. I was in a meeting today with the governor's office in terms of the point you just made, Zara, and we're going to try to work together with the UC and the community colleges and the California Department of Public Health on a statewide campaign that focuses on encouraging our students, our California's talented leaders to get vaccinated. So there'll be more information coming there, and maybe CSSA would like to be a partner with us in getting the word out. It'd be very helpful to have you and other student leaders encouraging folks to get vaccinated.
Absolutely. CSSA would more than happy be a part of those efforts. And
Thank
we're
you.
more than happy to be a part of a development that could be in the outreach team. It's really important to encourage our students to get those vaccines.
Thank you.
So I know we've shared earlier that, and you've shared that it's looking very promising for the FDA's approval.
Yeah.
But we've had a question that, what if only one of the versions of the vaccine gets approved and a student received a vaccine that was not FDA approved? Will those students still be allowed to come to campus?
Yeah, so I just read my email. FDA expected to okay Pfizer vaccine for youth 12 and older within a week. Within a week. So what this means, Zara, is that we will now have at least one vaccine approved, and my instinct suggests that because Moderna was just a few days behind Pfizer on the testing earlier, that they're likely to get approval shortly thereafter. I don't yet know how things will work out with other vaccines, including the Johnson & Johnson. However, with our policy, what we're looking at is, once there's one approved vaccine, if you get one of the other ones, you would be able to fulfill the requirement. So I hope that's clear. That so if you decide to get a J&J and that hasn't been FDA approved, it will still fulfill the requirement, or same with Moderna or Pfizer. So I hope that that helps, and you don't have to get just the one that was FDA approved.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. It's definitely reassuring to me. So thank you for sharing that. I think, again, that's very comforting for our students to know in advance what the expectation is, as the fall semester is a lot sooner than I'd like to think.
It's coming. It's coming.
It is, and I'm excited for us to be able to, again, develop a new sort of normal as we return to in-person.
Yes.
So I'm going to now shift the conversation. Once again, these are based on the questions that are coming in. So a student asked, will you be encouraging a sustainable return to campus? And if so, how? Some of the examples our students are sharing, including bike back to work efforts, sorting waste, and encouraging more recycling.
Absolutely. I think we're going to continue all those efforts, assuming that we can do so safely. And I can't promise that everything is going to be exactly the same in those areas as it was before the pandemic, because there's just so many moving parts. But the commitment is there, and I know that as soon as we can, we'll have those programs ramped up. If they're not right away, it will be over time. And again, I think that during this pandemic, we all have an even greater understanding of the climate issues. We've been seeing the wildfires during the pandemic, other issues all around the world. And so I think there's an even greater sensitivity today to the importance of this work than there was even before the pandemic.
Thank you. So the next question, isn't necessarily related to sustainability, but could assist with sustainability efforts. For campuses that are often considered commuter schools and have a very significant off-campus population, how will the CSU system as a whole try to balance the in-person classes and online classes that many commuters may be more comfortable with?
Well, we're certainly listening to the students. And what I've been hearing is that so many of you want to be back in person. However, I do hear from students who say, I kind of like some of this online education, and without the stress of the pandemic, I might want to take a course or two or maybe more. So I think that part of the new normal that you talked about is going to include both approaches. It's going to require us to be adept at serving the needs of those students who want the more traditional in-person courses, as well as those who might want more virtual. And I think that it will depend on where they live and where their campus is, and if they have a car, and if they have family circumstances. And from my perspective, it'll be a good thing that they could have that option. And it may not be in every single area, but I do believe there will be more options than there were before the pandemic. We've just learned so much, and some of our faculty are thriving in that environment. So I think that's going to be part of the new normal, that approach will, give students the choice, more choices than they had before.
Yeah, and that flexibility part, I think, is really important. And like you said, we've learned something from the pandemic about online learning. So I think there's great opportunities moving forward into, giving students multiple choices to be able to move forward with their degree.
Absolutely. When I was in Fresno, I served a lot of students from rural areas, and we were spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars on transit system subsidies and those kinds of things. And, it might be now that some of those students will say, oh, rather than being in a bus going back and forth an hour each way, maybe I'll do that once a week instead of 3 times a week, and I'll take my other courses online. So we'll see. I'm not exactly sure how students are going to respond. And it might be that this will evolve over time, but the university is planning to have, that kind of flexibility. And at the upcoming Board of Trustees meeting, there'll be a conversation about the post-pandemic CSU, and it has some ideas about what could happen, beginning in the fall.
I'm excited, and I'll definitely be tuning in.
Great.
We have a different question, actually. So outside of the topics of sustainability, a question asks, what type of new strategies will the CSU system deploy to close equity gaps that all campuses can adopt?
Thank you for that question. That is so important to me as your chancellor. If there's one thing that I want to accomplish with all of you during my period as chancellor, it is to close the equity gaps. Some of them have been stubborn for too long. And, our collective appreciation, I think deeper appreciation of the inequities in our society, I hope will inspire us to do even better in this area. So I've, set up a steering committee, as you know, on GI 2025. You're part of that, Zara, right?
Yes.
And I've charged you and the other members of the group to make some recommendations about ways in which we could strengthen our work in GI 2025, and especially eliminate the equity gaps. In addition to that, we're advocating for more resources from the state, and there will be foundations that want to continue to help us as well. So we're thinking creatively about how foundations like the Lumina Foundation and others can support our efforts. And then very importantly, just about 2 weeks ago, we shared the equity gap data by campus with all the presidents. And it was aimed at having us look at it together and to come up with some new strategies to eliminate it. And as you know, some campuses don't have equity gaps. There's one in particular, I can tell you, San Marcos really doesn't have any equity gaps, I think, the last time I looked. And then there are some that have, a large Pell gap or a large underrepresented gap, and sometimes both. So it will require us to have some different strategies at each campus, but rooted in what we know are the leading practices, proven practices. It's time for us to eliminate these gaps. And it's so important to me, just as a first generation college student. And I remember at the beginning, I tried to make that transition from the small high school to a big university, and it was tough at first. And I finally, was able to get the support I needed. And then I took off. And for some students, as you know, Zara, it just, they have a little bit longer road to travel, and we just need to help them to get there, support them. And every one of our 500,000 students has the gifts to do it. And it's just about how we support you and the others so that you can succeed.
Thank you for that. And I actually just wanted to thank the student that asked that question. It's so critical to talk about the equity gaps and what the system can really do to ensure that. And I appreciate being a part of the working group to provide some recommendations on how we can finally really, ensure that we have an equitable system for all students and whoever wants to get an education, regardless of their background.
Absolutely. And I would love to see that ASIs at each campus look at the equity gaps on their campuses and talk with their presidents and provosts and other members of the cabinet about that and what can be done to eliminate the gaps. I just really, as you said, I appreciate the question and the interest. And the more that we know together, I think the faster that we're going to be able to close the gap, because then we can all get behind strategies. And maybe some students aren't even aware that there are equity gaps. So I want them to be aware. On some campuses there are, and we need to work together to close those. And each president is going to be held accountable for that, as well as I'm held accountable by the Board of Trustees for doing it.
I agree. And I'm excited to see what we can all collectively come up together and to finally see those gaps close.
Yes, by 2025, that's my hope.
That's the goal.
Gotta work hard, but I think we can do it.
I think we can do it as well. I'm hopeful. I'm going to jump to another question. What are your thoughts on the student-faculty ratio and the percentage of faculty on the tenure track currently in the CSU system? And if so, how can we improve those ratios?
Well, I very much see the value of having tenure track faculty, especially as it relates to the success of our students. And as president of Fresno State, I worked really hard to invest more in tenure track faculty. So as chancellor, my goal is to get as many resources invested in our CSU as possible. And we've been having some good fortune so far with the legislature and keep pushing on that. But I really want each president to do all they can to hire tenure track faculty and other excellent lecturers. But I think each of the presidents knows that the tenure track faculty are the really core foundation of our academic strength. And as we get more resources, I'm hopeful that we can invest more in tenure track faculty, especially from underrepresented backgrounds. I think we have more work to do there in terms of having our faculty really understand the lived experiences of our students. And that's one of my highest priorities as well, is to accelerate the diversity of our faculty. We might be one of the few university systems in the country hiring faculty in the next year or two, given the budget situations in other states and in ours. And that gives us a competitive edge, I think, when we're out there recruiting for great faculty. So absolutely very important, and especially from underrepresented and women in the sciences and engineering as well.
I actually agree. And thank you so much for that. It's so important to be able to actually say that we have a diverse faculty that reflects its student population. I know personally for myself, it's very encouraging to see, women in the STEM fields,
Yes.
to have mentors and people to look up to. So it's exciting to see that these efforts are, something we want to push as a society. Again, I just wanted to actually make notice to our students before we move on to the second question about financial aid. I encourage the students to continue submitting their questions in the chat. So earlier you mentioned doubling the Pell Grant, which CSSA is also supportive of.
Yes.
And CSSA also supports AB 1456, the Cal Grant Equity Framework. So the question is, how are you working with the legislator and CSAC since the release of your position letter on AB 1456?
Thank you. Well, we've been in frequent conversations with Assemblyman Medina and Assemblyman McCarty, other members of the legislature and staff. And I know we've been in frequent touch with you too, Zara, CSAC, California Student Aid Commission, and others. And my hope is that we can find a path where we can support the bill. I'd very much like to do that. And I think it's possible with some tweaking. And the issue for us, just so I explain it to the other students, is that we very much want to see more aid to more students. And it's really important that we not do any harm to any of our current CSU students. So there are some details that need to be worked out so that there's no unintended negative consequences, because I think it's really important that as we improve the situation for more students, that we just don't do harm to those that are currently enrolled and kind of anticipate support from us. So that's really the issue, and we'll stay in close touch with everybody, and hopefully we can work it out together.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I look forward to that. I think overall, what's really critical is just ensuring our students get the financial support that they need to attend school, because oftentimes it's not tuition that's really impending on our students, but it's the non-tuition cost that's become a real barrier to our students who end up taking multiple jobs. And so it's just really important that we eventually find a way to support our students without them having to carry so many burdens on their backs.
It is. And, I have a lot of experience with financial aid because of my own background. And I was a Cal Grant B student. So I remember the stipend that I would receive, once a month. That was basically how I was able to buy food. And if I had any other incidental expenses, because I usually, use my other Cal Grant and my Pell Grant to cover the housing costs and books. And I was pretty lucky at that time that I was able to mostly make ends meet. But like so many students today, I struggled with food insecurity. And I lived in a house where we had the cook would make us meals during the week, but then the weekends we didn't have any meal service. So we were scrambling, and finally we talked them into letting us use the kitchen, and we were able to access the leftovers. And that was so helpful because I know some of my friends and I, we would skip meals on the weekends because you had just this much, and just stretching your resources. So I just want students to understand that I get it, and I very much want to get more financial aid to all of you so that you can succeed, the students that really need it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important when we share our stories and our narratives. I think it brings us closer together to understand where we've come from in our backgrounds and what struggles we've went through. And the harsh realities of being a student. If it was bad then, it's only gotten worse.
It has, you're right.
And we see how the pandemic really highlighted and brought forth so many issues. I think particularly for our students and our employees with dependents, and the issues they face on a day-to-day basis. So I was curious, what lessons did we learn on how to better support them, especially as the state trends are, going back to reopening?
Yeah, I feel like we've learned so much. I've had 2 jobs during the pandemic, and as a president, I know that the struggles were so very clear to me. And I actually found that I developed a closer relationship with the students that I served during the pandemic because they were telling me things that I was not hearing before. And I felt so good that they were disclosing those things to me. And it really shaped our aggressive positioning around the emergency grants, around virtual support, around technology support. And we had a very active student cupboard there with food and housing programs as well. So we strengthened those programs during that time. And I think that's what happened at the other campuses, as far as I can tell. And now as chancellor, at this stage, what I'm trying to do is continue to advocate for more resources for student food security and other basic needs programs, not just from California state government, but I want to inspire more philanthropists too. I think there's a lot more we can do to get private dollars to help our campuses. So that's something that I learned a lot about in Fresno, and I'm hoping I can bring some of those ideas to the system-wide level, and whatever it takes. I mean, I remember one of the few Latino farmers in the Fresno area, and he grew these incredibly delicious watermelons that cost like $5 at Whole Foods. He would drive his truck with full of watermelons and give them to the students at the cupboard, or other fruits and vegetables that were grown. And so it wasn't just money, it was actually these farmers who were CSU graduates that wanted to give back. And my feeling is we just need to find more people like that who, once they understand the need, are going to want to step up and provide support. So I as chancellor, want to encourage more of that, because I know that the needs are going to continue to be significant. So those are some of the lessons I learned, and just trying to use technology in this time when we can't be together in the same space to hear from more people. So forums like this are really important, because honestly, the chancellor is in this building in Long Beach, and I'm not on any campus, and I miss that. So I really need to stay connected with all of you through technology, since I can't visit you in person yet. So it's really important. And I know Dr. Wood feels that way, and all the leaders here in this building, because otherwise it's, you could lose sight of what's important. And I never want to lose sight of what's important.
Thank you for that. I was going to say, I do miss being on campuses and being able to visit the CSUs. And it's important that regardless of us being physically there or not, that we're still in touch with our campuses. And we've managed to make it work virtually, even if it's not the same experience. What really counts is, maintaining that communication and not being disconnected just because, we're not doing things how we've historically done. And I think sometimes we need to embrace change and to be innovative in how we tackle challenges.
You're right. Absolutely. I think this pandemic is also hopefully going to lead to more meetings that are like this. I love the in-person and want to continue to have some of that, but the whole idea of all of us traveling and staying in hotels and airplanes and all the money that we spent on that, I'm hoping that we'll be able to decrease that significantly, and that will mean more money that we can use directly for education. So that's one of the things I've learned from the pandemic. I don't want to go back to that whole life of all these in-person meetings when it might be possible for some of these things to be done, electronically.
I agree. It's a lot more sustainable as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So we have a question here that says, as a former president of the CSU who's worked with students and student leaders, what advice do you have for students who want to make an impact or change on their campus?
Oh, thank you. Well, my advice would be to express your view. And when presidents have their open forums, I used to love hearing directly from students, and your voices really do matter to the presidents and to their cabinet. So I would say participate in those forums. Write, if you can't, write an email. I mean, I read every letter, every email from all of you. Hit them up on Twitter, however way you want to engage, whatever makes you comfortable. Some students will send me a direct message, some will email me. I think that our presidents are very open to that kind of feedback. But please don't hold back. I would much rather, even if you feel like it's critical, and I used to say this at Fresno State, especially if you think I'm doing something that's crazy, please tell me, because I want to know, and maybe I'm doing it without knowing that it's crazy. So it's part of the learning process. So I would just urge you to lean in that way, and hopefully feel comfortable expressing your point of view and run for office. I know I'm probably talking to a lot of elected leaders who already have run, but do that and inspire others to run, and find ways for your clubs to be active in different ways. So those are just some strategies that I would suggest. But again, just as a former president, I really appreciated hearing from students directly. And I wouldn't want you to think that if you write an email or come to a forum that nothing's going to happen, because I always followed up, and I think our presidents are very eager to listen and to learn from you and see how we can serve your needs more effectively.
And I'm glad you shared some of these perspectives, because I learned in my time of leadership that it is so critical to hear from students directly and to hear that feedback. And I always told them, don't hold back, even if it is you feel too critical of me. I think it's important to hold me accountable in my leadership and how to move forward. And so I think that's a really important message to send to anyone in a leadership position is listen to people, even if it is critical of you. It's how you grow, it's how you improve, and it's how you build a community amongst the people that you're supposed to be leading.
Absolutely. You said it really beautifully. I mean, I'm a student of leadership as well. And in order for leaders to be effective, we must be connected to those we serve. And we might not always do exactly what people ask us to do, but I think it should shape what we do. And when we don't do exactly what they say, they should know why, right? I mean, this is why I can't do it exactly the way you want, but I've heard you, and this is how your view has shaped me and my own thinking. And I agree. It's just so important for us to listen and to learn. Um, and again, your point about accountability, it's a very important one.
Thank you. So another question is, what do you see are some of the issues that students and the chancellor's office can work together on in the next academic year?
Well, from my perspective, I like to say I want to work on the priorities that you have. And so I don't know if you remember our first conversation. I asked, well, what are your priorities? And that's usually how I start with, when I was at Fresno, I'd ask the president, what are your priorities? What do you want to accomplish? How can I help you accomplish those things? So I would start from that basis. And then, as you know, Zara, from time to time, I might say, what do you think about this issue or that issue? Trying to get feedback. But I try the best I can to support the priorities of CSSA, and will always do my best to fulfill that. And then when I can't do exactly what you ask, you'll know why, as we've had a few of those conversations as well. But I think it's really important for us to stay in close touch and to find as many areas to work on together that are a priority for you. And then if I see something important that I think it is worth us looking at together, then I would bring that to the table as well. But the starting point is what do you care the most about? What do you want to see accomplished?
I really appreciate your priority sort of is, let's start with where the students are at. And I think that's really critical, and just shows how student-centered you are. And I've appreciated the conversations and the spaces that we've had. And this is something that I learned when I attended the Panetta Institute. Is I learned that compromise is not necessarily right at the middle. It doesn't have to be 50-50. It could be 90-10. It's not such like one number, and that's what's important about compromise, and not to see it as a negative thing, but it could range, and it's okay to be at that point. So I'm glad that we can reach that sort of consensus together.
Absolutely. And I feel that way with the faculty as well. And I'm hoping during my chancellorship that we could actually, the three of us, the faculty, the students, and administration, can develop, along with the staff, just a strong focus on addressing the things that are most important for the CSU. And I have confidence that can happen. Professor Collins has been a great partner too. And I know the two of you have worked really well together. So I'm hoping that we can strengthen that relationship as well over time.
I'm sure we are. So as we get to wrap up within the hour, I first want to say that we're so appreciative of your time. We know that you're busy, but it speaks volumes that you continue to be committed in these spaces, and for students to directly hear from you, and for you to directly hear from us as well. So I did want to ask you a couple of fun questions before we wrap up.
Sounds good.
I saw some of them pop up on the chat, but what is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm Mexican, so it really is mostly Mexican food. I love spicy food. The people at Fresno State used to laugh because I'd have roasted jalapenos with every meal, which is pretty much true when I can. But no, I love Mexican food, whether it's tacos, burritos. I love menudo. I don't know how many of the students have eaten menudo, but that's a great that's a delicacy in our community. For some people are like, oh my God, no, but I love that. Nopales, cactus, but I love great Italian food as well, and Thai food. So I have a pretty eclectic taste, and thankfully Mary and I have been doing a lot of cooking together, and that's been a lot of fun.
I love spicy food as well.
Do you? All right.
I eat spicy everything.
You and me together on that.
So here's an interesting one. I don't know if you're a fan of baseball or not,
I
but
am.
Dodgers or Angels?
Oh, Dodgers, no question.
Dodgers.
Yeah. When I was in Fresno, there were kind of 50-50 Giants and Dodgers. And I was, of course, in the Dodger camp. And you mentioned earlier, I worked at UC San Francisco, and I used to wear my Dodger clothing into the San Francisco ballpark. And I get some, a lot of heckling, especially when the Giants won.
Recently been interested in baseball, but I'm a soccer fan.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't help it. But
Soccer's fun too.
I think I might start liking the Dodgers.
Yeah, you should go to a game now that they're opening up when you come back. Are you're still in Texas?
Yeah,
Yeah. When you
but
come back, if you can, it's so fun.
I definitely for sure. I miss California. But since we've hit the hour, that concludes our town hall for the evening. Again, I want to thank you, Chancellor Castro, for being with us today. And I also want to thank my fellow leaders for attending this evening and asking great questions. Everyone, have a good evening.
Thank you, Zara.
Thank you.